The hands of the clock on the office wall, frozen at midnight, seemed to move painfully slowly. The office space was oppressive in the semi-darkness from all sides. Rows of empty desks littered with papers, dim light from desk lamps, and the quiet hum of computers. Mikhail was sitting at one of the tables, staring at the monitor. His eyes were red-rimmed with fatigue as he tried to focus on the endless lines of numbers and graphs. In the silence, there was only the sound of keyboard taps, the scratching of a pencil, and the ticking of a clock. My wife promised to call an hour ago. Mikhail sighed heavily, leaned back in his chair, and looked at the phone screen. His wife Sonia was smiling at him from the locked screen. Her red hair fluttered in the wind, and the sun's rays illuminated her face. Mikhail involuntarily smiled back, remembering that vacation. He and his wife walked along the sea, enjoying the warm sun and light breeze. He remembered that evening for the rest of his life. She laughed, and her laughter was more precious to him than any music. Sonia was a gentle and caring wife, always supporting Mikhail, even when he had to work at night. On business trips, she often sent him cute photos to cheer him up from a distance. The last photo came in the morning. She was standing in front of the mirror in a hotel room in a light shirt. Mikhail opened the chat, looked at the sent photo, and felt a warm feeling for his wife, who always knew how to cheer him up. This time Sonia went to a conference in another city, organized in honor of the company's anniversary. She was staying in a room with a friend, which added to her good mood. Mikhail wondered why she wasn't calling, even though she had promised to do it a long time ago. He picked up the phone and dialed her number. After several rings, Sonia finally answered. "Hello, Vixen. How are you? I promised to call you in the evening, after the conference." "It's okay," Sonia replied, her voice sounding tired. Mikhail frowned. "Are you sure? You sound kind of tired. Or has something happened?" Sonia answered a little confused. "No, it's all right. We're just relaxing with our friends. I'll call you back." Mikhail wanted to say something else, but the connection was interrupted. He remained sitting in the silence of the office, wondering what could have happened. But I decided not to worry. Sonia always knew how to behave and was able to cope with any situation. Meanwhile, Sonia, having returned to the conference, sat down next to her friend Nika. The hall was full of people, and the next report began. "Misha called again," Sonia said softly, turning to her friend. "Is he controlling you all the time?" Nika asked with a smile. "You should take a break away from this routine for at least a couple of days." "No, he's just worried," Sonia objected. "We are rarely separated. But look around. A big city, a conference, so many new people. Have fun. Meet your colleagues. You can always relax and just spend time with interesting people." Sonia thought about it, looking around the hall. She was pleased to communicate with colleagues and meet new people. All this distracted her from her daily worries, and the idea of spending the evening in the company of new acquaintances seemed quite tempting. "Who else will be at the party?" Sonia asked quietly. "I don't know for sure," Nika replied, "but it's going to be fun, and maybe you'll even find new friends. The main thing is to rest and not think about work and worries." Sonia smiled, thinking that sometimes you really just need to relax and allow yourself a little freedom. "I can handle that somehow. Don't worry. They are cultured guys and probably timid. We'll just sit for a couple of hours, chat and leave." Sonia thanked the taxi driver and went outside, finding herself in front of a sign illuminated by warm lamps. The name matched, but Nikki was nowhere in sight. After dinner, the girls walked around the mall, choosing swimsuits. Despite Sonia's objections, Nika insisted on an emerald swimsuit. She dismissed all the closed swimsuits. They missed each other at the mall. Nika was distracted by her phone, actively typing messages, when a guy with coffee accidentally bumped into her. Nikki's white shirt was ruined, and her friend went to the hotel to change clothes. They agreed to meet in the sauna. Sonia continued shopping, and then went to the meeting, hoping that Nika was already there and would be able to introduce her to the company. The doors of the establishment were made of oak, painted in dark paint. Sonia knocked hesitantly. While she was waiting, her attention was attracted by a small, golden lotus flower on the door frame. The wood around the flower was cracked, as if it had been hammered in. Before she could examine the flower, The door opened a crack and a tall man in his 50s appeared on the threshold. He looked well-groomed. His hair was touched with gray, and he smelled of lavender and cognac. Sonia was surprised. In her small town, men his age rarely looked like that. "Am I listening to you, young lady? Good evening. I'm looking for a sauna. My friend invited me." A friend? What's her name?" "Nick." "I haven't heard of any nickname. Do you have an invitation?" Sonia was confused. The man pointed to the lotus symbol and said, "Stay here. How can I introduce you?" "Tell them I'm with Nika." "Nikki's not there. How can I introduce you?" "Sonia." The man left, returning a few minutes later, and opened the door wider. Sonia entered, still unsure whether she should go any further, but curiosity won out. "Through the left door for you. Personal items can be left in the locker. Phones and recording devices are prohibited." Sonia was worried about not leaving her phone, as she promised to call her husband. While the caretaker was returning to the counter, she discreetly hid the phone in the pocket of her shorts. There were voices and laughter outside the door, but instead of leaving, she pushed open the door and entered the hall. Sergey, with whom she had previously worked remotely, was the first to approach Sonia. "It's wonderful to get to know each other again, considering that we've been working together for 6 months, he smiled, shaking her hand. "I was almost out of business," Sonia replied sheepishly. "Yes, it is," added a bearded man with a stocky build. "Your request on the payment form helped us to get time to improve the system. I am Yevgeny. I am engaged in integration." Sonia smiled politely and held out her hand to him. There was a man sitting next to her, who nodded briefly in response to the introduction. It was Andrei, whom she recognized from the avatar in the chats. At the end of the table sat a young guy with a perfect manicure and blonde hair combed to one side. He was working on a client application, and his colleagues called him Zach. Zach looked slightly flustered and was constantly straightening his hair. Yevgeny poured whiskey and Coke, handing out filled glasses. "I think I'll decline," Sonia said politely. "I shouldn't drink. I have a little difficulty with it." "It's okay. Let's at least get to know each other." Sonia reluctantly agreed, but only for one glass. By 10:30, she had already drunk 3. Conversations in the sauna became more free, moving away from work topics. Sonia hardly followed the dialogue. "Who's going to the sauna?" Eugene asked. "You go. I'll wait for my friend," Sonia replied. Left alone, she decided to explore the sauna rooms. From the main hall, a door led to a room with a swimming pool and a steam room, where laughter was already heard. Sonia wanted to join her colleagues, but changed her mind. She took out her phone to call her husband, but she heard Sergey's voice. "Is it uncomfortable, perhaps, in such a company?" "Almost like when I was young," Sonia replied and quickly hid the phone. "We all make mistakes," Sergey said. "Sometimes you remember, and it becomes a shame." Sonia looked at him in surprise. His words reminded her of her own thoughts. "And won't you share it with me?" "I don't think we're close enough to discuss this," Sergey frowned. It was difficult for Sonia to focus on his face. Her gaze was wandering. "I understand," the stupidity suggested, "except that—" He went to another door, looked into the darkness and turned on the light. There was a large billiard table in the next room. "Don't you want to play? Maybe we'll talk in the process. For every ball I score, you will tell me something about yourself, and for every ball you score, I will tell you something about myself." Sonia's eyes lit up. Sergey touched her to the quick, the awakened excitement. "I'm the first to start." She took the cue and made a putt, but the ball did not hit the hole. "It will be an interesting game," Sergey grinned. He easily sent several balls into the holes. Sonia finally scored one and cried out joyfully. "I got it." "Well, tell me. Ask a question. I'll answer it." "And what is your favorite color?" "Green," Sergey replied with a smile, scoring another ball. "And why are you still in street clothes? Are you uncomfortable?" "I don't know. It seemed appropriate to me." "But all the other guys are wearing shorts," Sonia said. "Perhaps I should have thought about it in advance." Sonia smiled and decided to change her clothes. Under her casual clothes was a green swimsuit. "This shade of green is my favorite color," said Sergey. Sonia was a little embarrassed, but continued the game. Her next strike was far from the target. Sergey, having scored the ball, asked a new question. Why did you come to the sauna in the evening with almost strangers? I wanted to change the situation, Sonia replied. Work and everyday worries are tiring. Sergei nodded. The game continued. They discussed various topics. Sonia felt good just talking to Sergei, and by the end of the game, the tension between them had subsided. Will you try to score another ball? Sergei asked. Of course, Sonia replied with a smile. Since the ball is actually filled with me, I asked the question again. Would you like to go all out again and break the rules? I'm not. Misha, I am married. My question was not about your marriage. Everyone knows you're married anyway. But answer honestly. Do you want me to make concessions? Stop resisting. What's stopping you? The last ball is on the table. The last question. Sonia's thoughts were confused in her head, and her speech became slurred. Sergei handed her a cue, and she couldn't score a ball. Sonia turned quickly, feeling like everything was happening too fast. She stopped abruptly when Sergei supported her so that she would not fall. She felt confused and ashamed. After a short pause, Sergei walked away to the pool, leaving her confused. Sonia hurriedly gathered up her clothes and left the sauna, feeling awkward and guilty for everything that had happened. After packing up, she hailed a taxi and returned to the hotel, trying to leave unpleasant memories of what happened behind her. Here is an edited version of the text, with the removal of the mat, obscene expressions, and touching of the characters. Who is it that we have here? Jinya asked with a smile. Is it really getting hot to play billiards? It was the worst game I've ever played, Sergei replied. But I realized that our employee is much more playful than it seems at first glance. Sergei approached Sonia, but before she could react, he pushed her towards the pool. The water swallowed her up. Unable to swim, she tried to get out, but eventually got caught by someone nearby. Amid the laughter of others, she surfaced, greedily inhaling the air. What are you doing? I can't swim. It's okay. Don't worry, you're safe. Andre swam over to her and helped her get out of the water. She grabbed the edge and stood on the tile, and someone handed her a glass of whiskey. The noise of voices and merriment continued all around. A sip of alcohol burned her throat, but she continued to drink, realizing that this could lead to trouble. When the glass was empty, the people had already dispersed, leaving her alone. Sonia staggered out of the pool and headed towards the steam room. It was hot and stuffy there, but she decided to rest for a while, collect her thoughts. The steam that filled the room was so thick that Sonia coughed. Inside, there was a smell of fir cones and something sharp, as if someone had splashed alcohol on the stones. Sonia sat down on the bench, trying to catch her breath. Her thoughts began to get confused. My head was spinning from the heat and alcohol. She tried to get herself in order, but it was difficult to concentrate. At that moment, she was called out. Hey, how are you? Sonia looked up, and Jinya and Zach were standing in front of her. It's okay. I'm just a little overheated, she tried to answer, but the words were hard to come by. You need to get out of here, Jinya said, noticing her condition. He helped her up, and they went out of the steam room into the fresh air. Sonia tried to collect her thoughts, but she felt sick from alcohol and the heat. Who would have thought who we've been working with all this time? Jinya remarked with a sneer. You know, I've had the idea to try something for a long time, but my girlfriend is too strict and well-mannered for this. Well, what are you waiting for? You said yourself that I'm not like your right girl, Sonia replied defiantly, realizing that with such words she was only provoking the situation. But maybe that's what attracted her. Jinya, burning with desire, stopped restraining himself. He made a gesture indicating that Sonia should have followed him. The situation was such that Sonia understood that she was in a difficult situation, but there was no choice, considering that the whole atmosphere and actions were pushing for the continuation of the evening. She had to obey, realizing that she was in a difficult situation. Jinya continued to act, and the situation escalated, but Sonia tried to remain calm and not show weakness. Her thoughts were confused, but she was trying to keep control of the situation, despite everything that was happening around her. The conversation between the characters became increasingly tense, but the situation did not get out of control. It seemed that events were unfolding faster than expected, and Sonia understood that she needed to make a decision on how to behave next. Sergei joined the conversation, asking his questions and trying to figure out what was going on. The atmosphere was heating up, but it remained within the framework, without moving to any actions that could go beyond the bounds of decency. Zach handed Sonia a glass and helped her sit down at the table to rest a little. She felt tired of everything that was happening, but she remained the center of attention. Sonia suddenly pulled away and abruptly pulled Andre's hand away. Before he could object, she wasted no time stepping back, trying to avoid further action. To the sounds of fun and laughter around her, she continued to move, distancing herself from the surroundings and focusing on herself. Everything that was happening seemed remote and unimportant to her. Her body seemed to move on its own, and she didn't care about the looks that might be directed in her direction. There was a festive atmosphere around, but Sonia's attention was directed inward. She felt a strange mix of emotions and tried to cope with internal contradictions. Thoughts flashed through my head that everything had gone too far, but it was too late to retreat. The conversations around her continued, but she did not react, not wanting to get involved in what was happening. Suddenly, she got a call. A picture of her husband appeared on the phone screen. This call came as a surprise to her. "I can't answer right now," she whispered when the phone was handed to her. However, I still had to answer. "Hello," she said with difficulty, trying to control her voice. "Hi, how are you?" "You promised to call," she heard a familiar voice. "It's okay," Sonia replied shortly, trying not to betray her tension. "Are you sure? You sound a little weird," her husband continued, worried by her voice. Sonia quickly came up with an explanation, trying to speak as calmly as possible. "I'm just tired. It's been a long evening, a lot of things to do. Everything is fine." She managed to avoid unnecessary questions, and the conversation ended. The phone was put away, and the tension gradually subsided. She felt tired, but she tried to control herself. The room was filled with the hum of conversations and light jokes, but Sonia decided to rest and collect her thoughts. She was taken to another room where she could lie down and recuperate. The whole evening seemed blurry and difficult to perceive. Sonia became more and more immersed in her thoughts, trying to put them in order. She was surrounded by people, but she felt lonely and lost in what was happening. The night was coming to an end, and she woke up in the morning. The room was quiet, but her own thoughts haunted her for a long time. When the door opened a crack and a ray of light fell through the opening onto the bed, Sonia moaned softly. She was too tired to think about where to go. She really wanted to sleep a little more, at least for an hour. "Oh, my God. Sonia, I thought it was a joke," Nika said, looking at her friend. Sonia reluctantly opened one eye. Nika was kneeling next to the bed, her face expressing shock. She looked at Sonia, but did not dare to say anything. Nikki's words came to Sonia as if through a fog, and the explanations about the stuck elevator echoed in her head. "Sonia, what have you done?" Nika asked anxiously. "I told you, I can't drink," Sonia muttered softly before falling asleep again. When she woke up, Sonia was already in her room, lying on the bed. There was a phone on the bedside table with missed calls from her husband. She found a black plastic card with a picture of a golden lotus under the phone. This symbol seemed vaguely familiar to her. The card only had a QR code on the back. "How can I explain to my husband what happened last night?" Meanwhile, Genya left the room with a satisfied face. "I'm done," he said, sitting down at the table with the others. "Who's next?" "I'll go," Sergey said, getting up and throwing a towel on a chair. He was happy with how the party he organized went. Everything was going like clockwork, and he was confident that he would soon be able to apply for a promotion at the club. He had a long way to go up, and mistakes were unacceptable now. Everything was going as he had planned, and this encouraged him to take further steps. "Who's going to keep me company?" Sergey asked, looking around the audience. "I think I'll refuse," said Andre. "Not my format. And I'm ready." Eugene immediately responded, enthusiastically getting down to business. "Get some rest," Sergey said, looking away. "Whoever doesn't want to, doesn't have to." He looked at Zach, who was visibly embarrassed by his gaze. After a short pause, Sergey went into the room, and Zach, hesitating, followed him. "And what are we going to do?" Zach asked, looking at Sonia. "What would you like to try?" Sergey wanted to know how far his friend was ready to go. Zach nodded uncertainly, but hesitated to take the first step. In the end, Sergei gave him the opportunity to decide for himself what to do. Zach stood for a moment and then carefully offered his solution. "I think I'll trust you," he said at last. Everything was happening in a quiet and peaceful environment, but the tension was felt in the air. Zach continued to watch cautiously, trying to figure out how to proceed. The room was quiet. Zach watched Sergei with great attention and only came to his senses after his order. He looked at Sonia, who looked tired and indifferent. "You shouldn't feel sorry for her," Sergei remarked, continuing to speak calmly. "If you want something, take it. Or stop, and I'll do what's necessary." "I'm afraid of making a mistake," Zach admitted. "You won't know until you try. No one will disturb us here, and Sonia is not aware of anything. Just tell me and I'll do it myself." Zach nodded hesitantly, nervous. Sonia was lying on her back, not understanding what was happening. She tried to turn on her side, but Sergei stopped her, persuading her to stay where she was. "Let's do it now, while she's still with us a little bit," Sergei said calmly. "And now?" Zach hesitated. "Stop hesitating. Do what you're told." Zach, though hesitantly, agreed and stood up. Sonia muttered something softly, but her words were unintelligible. Sergei, watching Zach, noted with interest his indecision, but did not show it. "You can stop at any time. Say stop, and I'll stop everything." "But you didn't tell me the safe word." Zach was confused. "This is a lesson. You'll think about it in advance next time." Zach was breathing hard, trying to collect his thoughts. He was completely focused on what was happening. "Here you go," Sergei said, handing him a glass of water. "You must be tired." Zach took a glass, drank some water, and looked at Sergei without looking up. The man stood next to him, confident. "I don't know what to say," Zach whispered. "It's better not to say anything at all," Sergei smiled. "If you like something, enjoy it. But never lose your dignity. Otherwise, you will be manipulated." Zach nodded, realizing the meaning of what he had said. Sonia rolled over on her side, and her face was relaxed. Zach wiped his face and left the room. Sergei stayed in the room, lighting a cigarette. "What was that?" Sonia asked, opening one eye. "Don't worry," Sergei replied. "It's already over." Sergei then went to the others, who were enthusiastically looking at the phone. Genya and Andrei were discussing something. "Why are you meddling in other people's business?" Sergei asked sternly, looking at Genya. "It's already enough what happened. It is not necessary to delve into the personal. We just looked. Nothing like that." Genya tried to justify himself. "Here, she sent a selfie to her husband today. It looks good." And, innocently, Andrei added. "Let's stop it," Sergei said firmly. "If you behave like this, there will be no more such meetings." "How did you arrange this?" Andrei asked, distracted from the phone. "It's not the first time," Sergei replied calmly. "But the situation was unusual. We were lucky that she agreed. Otherwise, everything would have gone completely differently." "But how did you know?" Zach asked, lying on the couch. "I have an old friend, Maxim, who knew her since university. He told me a lot. So it wasn't all that much of a surprise to her." "Wow, that's right." Genya laughed. "I wonder if her husband knows?" Sergei looked at him sternly, and Genya immediately fell silent. The others also took his words seriously, avoiding further questions. "And none of you are going to talk about tonight, okay? I won't let you hurt her. And you," his voice turned hard as he turned to Eugene, "are getting the last warning. One more trick like that, and you won't be participating in such meetings anymore. And not only in those that I organize, but also in the club you will no longer be expected. Do you understand? If you think that your status is permanent, you are mistaken. I hope I've explained it clearly enough." Genya nodded silently and looked sullenly out the window. Sergei sat down in an armchair, lit a cigarette, and picked up Sony's phone, opening the photo taken earlier. Despite the fact that he forbade bringing any devices into the sauna, she managed to deceive the old caretaker. Since she managed to smuggle the phone in, Sergei thought it was quite reasonable to leave her compromising evidence as a keepsake. If she wants to, she can erase the photo in the morning. He chose the moment and captured her face after the event, realizing that this photo would probably remain just for her. The silence in the room was interrupted by Nika, bursting into the room. Well, hello. It seems like it's not your style to arrive on time, Sergey remarked, approaching her. The presence of several guys didn't bother her. The damn elevator in the hotel is stuck. I sat there for several hours before I was released. Did I miss everything? As you can see, Sergey nodded at Zach, who was sitting in an armchair. I was already going to let the guys go, but if you want, someone else can participate. Oh my God, where's Sonia? Your friend was the center of attention. Literally. Nika sighed with displeasure, threw her things on the table, and ran into the room where Sonia was lying on the bed. Meanwhile, the guys began to put themselves in order. They took a shower, cleaned up the garbage and bottles, and put the room in order. By the time Nika returned, they were already in their underwear. She's in such a state, Sergey. You should be ashamed. You took advantage of the situation. Rather, she took advantage of us. We were waiting for you, but everything turned out differently. Sonia did everything on her own. She decided to have fun. Everything went well, don't worry. I think she won't remember all the details, but she will definitely be satisfied. Let's get her dressed and take her to the hotel so she can sleep in peace. An hour later, Sergey and Nika delivered Sonia to her hotel room. Sergey laid her on the bed, then went over to Nika. I left her a club card, he said. She is an interesting and energetic girl. Make sure she finds it and doesn't throw it away. And prepare her for possible questions from her husband. You know how to handle situations like this. Sonia won't want to go to the club. Hey, that's what you thought about yourself. But look what happened. Sergey smiled and left, closing the door behind him.